I've used my power for myself. I've been a bully. I've manipulated, I've seduced, I've lied, I've cheated, I've broken a lot of rules throughout my history. And I'm sharing all of that because it's important, one, for me to share openly things that I still feel some sense of shame or fear about sharing. Two, to humanize me. I am not perfect. I'm still working on this stuff too. And three, the more that I share my inner world or secrets that I want to.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast with your host, Leigh Brandon. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and a warm review. And now, here is Leigh, the Radical Health Rebel, with this week's podcast.
Jator Pierre, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing sleepy. A late night hockey practice, early morning hockey practice, and maybe the more tired I am, the more truth will flow through my lips. We'll see.
Awesome. So today's episode is entitled Healthy Masculinity with Jator Pierre. Now, prior to our discussion today, I decided to look up the dictionary definition of masculinity. And it's defined as qualities or attributes regarded as characteristic of men. So that's the dictionary definition. But in our current world, where gender roles and gender identity have changed greatly over the last few decades and years respectively, I thought it would be a great topic to discuss with one of the coolest cats on the planet. So I'm really pleased to have you, Jator, on the Radical Health Rebel podcast today. So to kick things off, what I'd really love for you to do is to share with the Radical Health Rebel audience and, for them to get to know you. Can you tell us about your upbringing, your background, a little bit about your professional training and career to date?
Yeah. And thank you for having me on, Leigh. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure.
Background, kinesiology, Czech Institute, Kresser Institute, Journeys of Wisdom, JP Sears being one of my really close friends, and I think really sparking the interest in psychology and emotion and feeling and sensation. And throughout that process over the years, I think maybe about 12 years into being a personal trainer or strength and conditioning coach, I became deeply fascinated with what was going on inside of me, emotionally. What were these experiences of when I would get defensive or proving or irritated, or why was something so joyous or celebratory for me? So I really got fascinated by my own experience of myself and others, and in working with athletes and people, getting to certain peaks that would taper off and couldn't keep peaking, or issues that or symptoms that weren't being addressed, even though I was doing everything right with myself or with others. And that really sparked my interest in what was going on in my heart. And
At what age were you when you started going down that pathway?
23. 23, I went to my first Vipassana 10-day retreat, and that really sparked a lot of self-awareness and the interest in what was going on inside of me. That experience was life-changing, and I wish I could take all credit for that experience in terms of going there, but I've been influenced by two parents who have always kind of been outside the box in terms of normal cultural ideas and society, and Tai Chi and Qigong and the universe and chanting and all that was things I grew up with. So it was maybe a natural expression. And after coming back from Vipassana, there was a much higher degree of interest in myself and interest in others and why we do what we do. And when you bring up this topic of healthy masculinity, I was apprehensive, to be honest, and also excited to chat about it.
Me too.
Because there seems to be, there's a lot going on right now with these topics. And there's also a lot going on right now with political correctness and what you say and what you don't say. And I'm a person that often breaks down those doors and bashes through them and doesn't really, of course there's a part of me that cares what other people experience about me, but there's also a part of me that is excited to share my truth and my perspective on some of these topics. And I think before we jumped on, you and I were talking about some vulnerability ideas, and it's important for me to share that often behaviors that are shamed or feared are necessary for us to learn a different way. And so I'm 45, and I can happily and uneasily say that there's been lots of times in my life where I've played the role of, let's say, an unhealthy masculine or unhealthy male. I've used my power for myself. I've been a bully. I've manipulated, I've seduced, I've lied, I've cheated, I've broken a lot of rules throughout my history. And I'm sharing all of that because it's important, one, for me to share openly things that I still feel some sense of shame or fear about sharing. Two, to humanize me. I am not perfect. I'm still working on this stuff too. And three, the more that I share my inner world or secrets that I want to keep from others, the less powerful those secrets become. And the more in touch I get to be with myself and understand myself. And from my perspective, that also leads me to a place of being able to change a behavior. The more shame or fear about a behavior, in my experience, often the more stagnant the behavior actually becomes. The more that we learn to acknowledge, tap in, understand, reframe, integrate, and learn to trust ourselves. Often what I found in my practice with myself or with others, then the behavior has a little easier time changing or shifting. So it's been a wild ride. It's taken me a long time to learn some very challenging and hard lessons. And I feel as a general theme, I'm on the other side of that and living my life now in the most integrous, honest, grounded, and let's say authentic way that I can.
So the time when you started to kind of look deeper into yourself and other people, you said you was about 23, you're 45 now. Can you tell us a little bit about before you were 23?
Yes. Let's see, before I was 23, I was raised in an environment with a father, in my experience, that was very stereotypically masculine, the traits that many of us attribute to, let's say, a healthy masculine, also unhealthy aspects. And he was very soft and emotional when I was young, and then became, in my experience, very militant and very unforgiving. And that influenced me tremendously at those younger years of becoming hardened, closed off, unemotional in the sense of anything other than joy, aggressiveness, happiness, and lust was pretty much off the table. Shame, depression, fear, insecurity would never be shared or talked about. It was very tight-lipped. At least my expression of it as I was out there living life as a teenager or a young man. And then with my group of friends, I also attracted a group of friends that were essentially into the same perspective. And as I was driving home this morning to chat with you, I was listening to some music, and I was thinking, it's really interesting. The music that I was listening to at that time, Snoop Dogg, Tupac, NWA,
JP's favorite, Snoop Dogg.
JP's favorite, E40. Nothing against those cats and their music. I still enjoy their music today. And the music, though, that I was ingesting at the time, I didn't have the conscious awareness to kind of separate out those behaviors aren't behaviors that I need to act out to be cool or to be accepted. And a lot of those behaviors in that music, at least at that time, was using women and not caring about women in any sense, honestly, other than to use them for your self-gratification. And that was definitely a large part of my youth, being a player, and alcohol and drugs, and getting my needs met by using other people so I could look cool to my friends. And I learned a lot through those experiences, and over the years have shifted to acting out in a very different way. And yet it took a tremendous amount of awareness and work to change those behaviors over time, to the point of almost everyone that was in my circle is no longer in my circle, no longer fits. And that's been a challenge, and new people have come into my circle, but those people are much fewer and far in between, because it's not, at least in my experience, it's not normal for a male to be emotionally expressive or to be vulnerable and intimate. At least from an emotional perspective, to share fear or to share shame, or to not be defended or proving, or always competing and comparing, so that we can feel some sense of self-righteousness or arrogance about that. So I've learned a lot of what I don't want to do in the world. And that has informed who I've become today, which again has taken a lot of work.
So what you described your life to be like when you was, say, a teenager, I think is very common, right? It's not uncommon for young males to behave that way. Where do you think that comes from?
Well, I think there's some level of biology involved in this, of course. The old nature and nurture argument, which I don't really understand the argument, but they're both important. And when we look at, if we take out biology and we just look at culture, at least in my culture here, it's acceptable to teach males, at least historically, acceptable to teach males to not have feelings, to push through no matter what the experience is, to be hard, to be hyper independent, to be aggressive, almost to the point often of being mean or shaming others through sport or action. And when that's coming from the top down in terms of the people that we're surrounded by, our family of origin, and culturally accepted and celebrated, I'll use a side example to this celebration. You've heard of something called man flu, I'm assuming. So what's so fascinating to me about something like man flu, you have men who get sick. I've been sick. You've been sick. And we get sick. And when we actually share the pain of that, or the fatigue of that, or I can't push through, or I need to stay home, something like man flu comes about. And the interesting thing about that is a way of shaming men into more of the behavior that so many people say that they don't want men to experience or to proliferate anymore. So when I say celebrate, there is often this subconscious agenda culturally to proliferate behaviors, even though many people say that behavior is toxic or unhealthy or shouldn't be around anymore. And this happens at very subtle levels, like something like a man flu. It's funny, it's a joke, and really it's not. It's really shaming to a man who is maybe finds a safe place to express his vulnerability when he's sick, gets shamed for it, and then that causes more hiding of emotion in the future. This reminds me of something from my past. I knew I shouldn't have done this. I should have just kept it to myself. I should have manned up and hid my real feelings. And that just continues to proliferate the situation. So, when you ask where it comes from, my experience is that it comes from our experiences of family of origin and culture. And that's a very hard piece to change unless we start to change at the bottom, at the child level, and at the top, at the adult level. Those two places need to work together to adjust for behavior, or else we're just going to continue to get more of the same growing up in those environments. Right now I'm coaching 14U ice hockey, and I'm paying attention to how other coaches and how other parents interact with young men. And it's still the same perspective. You're not that hurt. Shake it off. What are you crying about? If you cry, you're overly emotional. And the opportunity that I have now in that is, like, just last night, I had to cut a kid from my team. And that's not an easy thing to do. I was anxious about it all day long. And as I'm sharing this with him from the most heartfelt place I could find, I teared up too. He was crying. I started to tear up and have tears shed. And for me, that's an extremely beautiful moment for him and for me. He gets to see a male tear up and not shame himself about it. And he also gets to experience my words to him were, your feelings matter and they're important. And it's okay to cry and it's okay to be hurt. I've been through this too, and I know what it's like. So back to your original question, that's partly where it comes from, is this historical idea of what being masculine means to us and what we project onto men and expect men to act like. And when men don't act like that, we often get shamed for it, which pushes us further into that shame fear cycle, which creates more propensity for the behavior to act out. I've been in relationships or partnerships where I've been told, you're not a man. You're not a man because, excuse me, because you want to talk about what's going on in our relationship. You're not a man because you want to go to therapy and work on things prior to issues coming up and or when issues or challenges come up. You're not a man because you're more emotionally expressive than I am. And that's been an interesting experience for me in dating women. Is often I've heard women want an emotionally expressive man who's grounded and thoughtful and can be present. And some of my experience in that place has been the woman becomes threatened by my ability to be more emotionally expressive than she is. And that creates an interesting change in what some might call a power dynamic. If the woman in a typical traditional relationship, if the woman is more emotionally expressive on that spectrum, there's a sense of power and arrogance and righteousness that can come with that, in the same sense that the man might have power, arrogance, and sense of righteousness in terms of what he thinks he can produce or do in the world, etc.
Thanks for watching the Radical Health Rebel YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to share with your friends and family or share via your social media. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to receive notifications of new video clips from the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode, completely ad-free, plus premium content, and join the Radical Health Rebel Patreon community, head on over to the Radical Health Rebel Patreon channel at www.patreon.com/Radical Health Rebel. Thanks again for watching.